Hi, everyone. My name is Anita, and today I will be presenting to you my dissertation presentation, A Hermeneutic Phenomenology Study, How Students Affected by Trauma Experience Transformative Learning Through Digital Learning Tools. And yes, after 4 years of hard work, I finally know how to pronounce hermeneutic phenomenology study. Today in our agenda, we will begin with an introduction and understanding of the scope of the study, a literature review, my research questions, methodology, data analysis, trustworthiness, participants and key results, limitations and future research, as well as a conclusion and summary. To begin, I'd like to share with you about the prevalence of ACEs, also known as adverse childhood experiences. These traumatic experiences can include emotional, physical, or sexual abuse, with 60% of American adults reporting at least one ACE and 43% reporting 4 or more. That means that almost 50% of our population are reporting 4 or more ACEs. And the cost of those ACEs adds up with the cost to our economic, corporate, and medical system, adding up to $1.4 trillion annually in the United States alone. Can you imagine what it's like globally? Of the many effects of ACEs, one of those very prominent effects is the barriers to learning. Trauma creates physiological, behavioral, and academic obstacles. And the reason for this is because ACEs or trauma affects your executive functioning, which creates a psychological barrier to being able to perform at schools. Digital learning tools offer a potential solution by providing personalized learning and the ability to foster transformative learning. As for the rationale for my study, the problem is that students are affected by trauma, and that trauma creates a range of academic challenges for them. Practically speaking, teachers are facing increased ACEs and also resource constraints. I think that digital learning tools can help to serve them at scale. The empirical significance of my study is that at present, there are little research that explores the relationship between digital learning tools and students who have experienced ACEs. So I've created this hermeneutical phenomenological study to understand how the transformative learning process occurs for students affected by trauma by studying a program that facilitates transformative learning through digital tools here in California. The theoretical framework that I have chosen to use is that of transformative learning first developed by Jack Mezirow. Although he breaks down his transformative learning into 10 different steps, I've broken it down into just 3. Basically, it's the before state, which is the student's understanding and perspectives of themselves and the world before the program. The during state, which are shifts in the student's motivation and action during the program. And finally, the after state, which is how students view themselves and the challenges that they face after the program. In terms of the literature review, the current literature finds that students are negatively affected by trauma, and that appears particularly in their academic performance because trauma directly affects their executive functioning ability. That's their ability to learn, that's their ability to plan, that's their ability to face challenges and complex ones at that. Furthermore, when we look specifically at sexual abuse, it appears as feelings of self-hate, self-blame, and even self-harm. One very practical effect of sexual abuse is that it can create somatic complaints like headaches or stomach aches. So it follows then naturally that students would have low achievement if they can't focus because of the pounding headache that they're experiencing in class. This brings us to the literature gap. First, it's not comprehensively established that adolescent students are suited for transformative learning, although emerging research does demonstrate that adolescents can experience this type of learning. Transformative learning was established as an adult learning theory, so there's still more research that needs to be done as to how adolescents respond to transformative learning programs. Secondly, although we find that digital learning tools does support the principles of transformative learning, there's no clear evidence demonstrating that digital learning tools can spur transformative learning. And finally, we find emerging research that teachers are ideal for delivering transformative learning interventions, but more research is still being developed on that front. My research seeks to combine all three of these areas, demonstrating that adolescents can engage in transformative learning, that digital learning tools are a part of spurring that transformative learning, and finally, that school education is ideal for delivering those interventions. This brings me to my research questions. The first central question is, how do students affected by trauma experience transformative learning through digital learning tools? Sub-question 1 focuses on the before state. How do adolescents affected by trauma make sense of changes in their understanding and perspectives as promoted by digital learning tools? Sub-question 2 focuses on the during state. How do adolescents affected by trauma interpret shifts in their motivations and actions as supported by digital learning tools? And finally, sub-question 3 focuses on the after state. How do adolescents affected by trauma reflect on their view of self and ability to navigate challenges with the support of digital learning tools? This brings me to my methodology. I chose to use a qualitative methodology because it helped me understand the lived experience of my participants. Second, I chose a hermeneutical phenomenology design because this allowed me to be one of the human instruments when interpreting the results. And finally, for the data collection, I chose to use individual interviews, a focus group, and journal prompts to really get that rich and thick description of the students' lived experiences. As for my research design, I chose to study students who lived in the Horizon Valley. All of these students had experienced some form of ACEs, including students who had experienced trafficking. All of the students that I interviewed were alumni of the program and were aged between 18 and 24 at the time of the program. As for my sample, I chose purposive sampling as recommended by the program directors and also other alumni. Again, they were the alumni of the IC Tech program, which allowed them to engage in transformative learning through digital learning tools such as Zoom, Google Coursera, and Cisco cybersecurity courses. The sample size was 10 students. As for the time frame, it took me about 4 weeks to collect the data and about 4 weeks to analyze the data. Regarding the qualitative data analysis, I chose to use holistic reading, memo writing, as well as thematic analysis, all recommended by Van Mantman, and also use Atlas TI for organization. Here, I'd like to disclose my researcher bias. As a sexual abuse survivor and someone who has experienced transformative learning through digital learning tools throughout my educational journey, I understand that I have a particularly potentially rosy view of how digital learning tools can support students who've been affected by trauma. But still, even with that perspective, I was surprised by my results. As for the trustworthiness and ethical considerations, we begin with the credibility, which I established through triangulation, peer debriefing, and negative case analysis to boost the transferability, dependability, and confirmability of my study. Regarding the permissions, I received IRB approval as well as approval from the program directors and the participants themselves, who again were all over the age of 18. As for other participant protections, I had mental health services at the state and federal level on hand, ready to give to the students if needed. Now let's take a look at the participants. I interviewed 10 students. You can see their ages here, as well as whether or not they graduated high school. Most of them did, though not all. And you can also view their college education here. None of them were college graduates, but most of them had participated in some form of college. And we had an equal male and female split. Here are the results that so shocked me. I found that there were 5 themes that emerged from the results: that of encouragement, self, learning, confidence, and motivation. These 5 themes recurred throughout the students' answers, and I found that they were supported by 14 different sub-themes which fall under each of the 5 categories: community, mentor, and peer encouragement; a view of self that would lead to isolation, negative beliefs; and after the program, a transformed view of self. As for learning, they had typically negative online learning experiences as well as negative experiences with learning overall. Under communication, self-efficacy, and comfort zone, these are the areas that help to boost their confidence. And finally, under motivation, we saw extrinsic, intrinsic, and also a faith component serving as their motivators. Regarding the results of the central question, I wanted to understand how students affected by trauma were experiencing their transformative learning through those digital learning tools. I found that students who experienced trauma had a very common response, which is to isolate themselves from their peers and their social circles. In that dark hole of isolation, they would experience a lack of direction and a sense of academic defeatism. This negative view of self and learning was then challenged by community encouragement through this IC Tech learning program. And so students were able to complete the program with a restored sense of self and ability to navigate future challenges. You can see the process here, that trauma creates isolation, and you can get stuck in that sense of isolation. But that negative view of self is then challenged, it's disrupted by community encouragement. It's that disorienting dilemma that Jacques Mesereau refers to at the beginning of the transformative learning process. And that disruption carries through the transformative learning that allows students to complete the program with then that restored sense of self and their belief that the world will be kind to them and they can achieve their goals. Let's break this down into 3 sub-questions. First, how do adolescents affected by trauma make sense of changes in their understanding and perspectives as prompted by digital learning tools? So prior to the program, we saw that students had very negative views of themselves. They would say things like, I'm just not good at school, or I thought I was dumb. And they also had negative views of learning, like, I just thought school wasn't for me, or I just couldn't do that type of thing. Then that negative view of learning was compounded by online learning during COVID-19, which for all of us was kind of an awful experience, but even more so for students who already didn't like learning and now were forced to do it through a tiny screen. However, the program milestones helped to increase their confidence through group projects where they had to communicate and lead over Zoom. Regarding sub-question 2, how do adolescents affected by trauma interpret shifts in their motivations and actions as supported by digital learning tools? I found that program completion required discipline, consistency, and time management from the students. And when the students wanted to give up because of these very challenging tasks that honestly all of us struggle with, it was the community and mentor and peer encouragement that got them through. A friend that would text, "Hey, are you coming to class?" Or a friend's mom that would prepare cookies when they came to the kitchen table to take the class on Zoom. These are the moments that help to carry our students through. Faith was also highlighted as a significantly motivating factor. We had students say things like, I made a promise to God that I would finish this course and I wanted to keep my promise to him. And so you see this beautiful blend of encouragement, whether it's coming from themselves or from others or even from a divine source, that help these students to overcome these challenges and actually complete their program. Finally, moving on to sub-question 3, how do adolescents affected by trauma reflect on their view of self and ability to navigate challenges with the support of digital learning tools? First, we found that students concluded the program with a restored sense of self, and that looked different for everyone. For some students, that meant that they felt like they could provide for their children while working from home because of their new tech skills. For other students, that meant a renewed desire to go back to school. For another batch of students, that meant they could start working directly in the communities that they were raised in. Across all the students, we found a common theme that isolation was refuted by community care, and that sense of direction, hopelessness, like directionlessness, was replaced with a sense of self-efficacy, that if I put my mind to it, I can do it. And that is part of what allowed the students to emerge with strong future orientation, whatever their goals were. I have to say that I was deeply surprised by my own results. To be honest with you, at the beginning of my studies, I really hoped that I could find a digital tools, digital learning program that had the right blend of UX, UI, or curriculum design, and that the tech is what would lead to the transformation. But what I found was pretty much the opposite. I found first that as students, as learners, as maybe people, we're meant to struggle, and that struggle is necessary for growth. But we are not meant to struggle alone. The friction of challenge, the friction of learning throughout the program, I found to be a feature, not a bug. In fact, it's in those moments of friction that we lean on community and we're able to overcome. The challenge of learning is a good thing. Finally, I found that transformative learning is really, thought of in another way, the replacement of survival skills to what I call thrival skills. Those thrival skills are necessary for a student to begin thriving in the world where creativity is valued, joy is valued, hope is valued. I'll give you a quick example. Isolation might help you survive, but it won't help you thrive. In order to thrive, you have to learn how to live in community, how to communicate, how to lead, how to share your challenges and help others with their challenges. Here, I'd like to acknowledge some of the constraints of my study. First, all of my interviews were conducted on Zoom and transcribed by Otter AI. Otter AI did fail transcription in one interview, but thankfully Zoom had a backup transcription, so it didn't affect the results at all. 3 of my students from the referral pool were rejected due to their age being above 24. I only interviewed those between 18 and 24. 4 students revealed their age mid-interview, so they were also asked to lead the study. And finally, one student revealed a learning disability that would have prevented her from joining the focus group interviews effectively, so she was also asked to leave the study, gently, of course. As for the delimitations, I only interviewed the alumni of the program, and non-graduates of the program may have had a differing view. That's an interesting study to follow up on for sure. Only those alumni between 18 and 24, again, were invited, meaning that older graduates may have had a different experience since they may not be as technologically adept. As for future research, I recommend that if we're looking at the same program, we could run the same study, but with non-graduates or older graduates. And furthermore, we could follow up on these 10 participants to find the long-term effects on their career, family, and quality of life. As for other programs, we could review this program again, but through a quantitative study, mixed method study, or applied research. As for the implications on policy and practice, I would advise policymakers that Human interaction is at the seed of transformation. So as we are rapidly adopting EdTech in many, many school districts, it's equally important to require those relationship-based interactions for students to truly learn and grow. As a result, I would advocate for the slow and thoughtful adoption of EdTech rather than the feverish speed that we seem to be adopting EdTech broadly. As for practice or for teachers, I would recommend that you view technology as a platform rather than being the seed of transformation itself. While allowing for technology supports, prioritize community encouragement and human interactions, because that is truly what will allow your students to overcome the challenges that they face. When adopting tech programs, I would also recommend taking on a trauma-informed lens so that you understand how these technology programs might land with students who have ACEs. This brings me to my summary. The digital learning environments that we create can foster transformative learning. But as amazing as that is, technology can only be seen as a platform, maybe even as a tool or a milestone to measure progress. But technology itself is not the source of transformation. Human interaction is. Human encouragement is. Communities wrapping around students who've experienced brokenness, that's the seed of transformation. In a nutshell, care is where we see students moving from not believing in themselves to believing in themselves because they know that others believe in them too. As mentioned, transformation is rooted in community, and it's that strength of relationships that allows students to emerge with a strong future orientation. If I were to give an analogy here, I would say that transformation is like a caterpillar turning into a monarch butterfly. I'm from California, and so this analogy hits close to home. At first, we're kind of exposed to the world, we're eating, 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 and then we're isolated in a cocoon. And in that transformation process, we need encouragement, we need the sunlight, we need all of the food that we've eaten to metabolize. And from that moment, as students emerge in the midst of the struggle, in the midst of the challenge, they will transform. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to continue chatting with you if any of these themes resonated with you and your work. Thanks so much, and let's safeguard children with our tech.